So I picked this book up as a holiday read, but it delivered way more than I was expecting. And it was almost this time last year that I actually bought the audiobook and decided to listen to it as part of my winding down for summer. So why did I choose Dream Count by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie in July 2025? So here's the thing. Around this time of year, I am normally thinking, what am I going to read to wind down? My brain just almost like switches into a different gear. I think some of it is because everybody's on leave. It just starts to feel a lot quieter. That's probably why I'm recording this, right? Is because things start to quieten down and my brain is like, okay, I need something that's like a little bit different. I need to switch things up. I'm feeling maybe a little bit more creative. That's exactly what happened, and that's why I ended up turning to this book. So here's the thing. I had never ever read one of Chimamanda's books, but I had been seeing her quite a lot over the last couple of years. So first of all, in 2022, she recorded the BBC Radio 4 Wreath Lectures, which I love. And there was a series on the four freedoms. And she basically delivered one of the lectures, which was about freedom of speech. And I really loved her perspective. And one of the things she was talking about, for example, was what freedom of speech looks like in literature and whether or not people should be censored based on what they write in literature. And that just really fascinated me, her take on that. So I love that. Then I saw her, fast forward a couple of years, I saw her in March 2025 on Trevor Noah's What Now podcast. What Now, What Next? On his podcast, which I'll link below if I remember to do that. And I just found her perspective really interesting. She's quite, I don't want to say she's quite contrary, but she definitely is not afraid to bring a different perspective, and she's not afraid to disagree respectfully, which is something that I always love. So when I heard about this book and I heard about the themes in the book, which is, you know, women, friendships, dating, I thought that'll be nice and light for a summer read. Little did I know, right? Here's the thing: when it comes to books about like women and friendships, I'm a massive Sex and the City fan. Right, Sex and the City, and then the new thing, you know, and just like that, I loved it, absolutely loved it, loved the films. I've even got the shoebox somewhere. If you know, you know. If you're a massive Sex and the City fan, you know about the shoebox. So I love those stories of female friendships because for me, that's what Sex and the City is about. And I think women of my age, my generation, you know, us Gen Xers, I think we like that. And actually, a lot of what we took away from shows like Sex and the City was the female friendships. It wasn't so much about the fact that they were pushing the boundaries in terms of talking about women and sex, which actually there are similarities in this book. So if you haven't read Dream Count and you were a fan of Sex and the City for that reason, in terms of the friendships and women talking about relationships, I think you would really enjoy this book. And one of the things that I will include for this book in particular, in the description, I will include some book club questions. Haven't got long enough in this video to talk about book clubs, but if you know, you know, I used to run a physical book club, and book club questions is something I was always looking for. So at the bottom of this, I will include book club questions. I am also going to do another video about how to run a book club. There is already one in the playlist. But I'm going to do another one that's kind of like updated for now and AI and all of those sorts of things. Right. So amazing book. So what's it about? It's interesting. The book is called Dream Count, but her friends call it her body count. I mean, the other thing I loved about the book as well is the protagonist in the book is a writer like Chimamanda. So I think there are kind of like some parallels between real life, and apparently Chimamanda has talked about some of the things that she had gone through in the previous years. In particular, she lost her father in 2020 and also her mother in 2021. You know, I guess near to and coming off the back of COVID, and the book starts in COVID. It starts with like Zoom calls for family. Who remembers those, right? And so that to me kind of just really, I thought there are probably some parallels in here between her own life with the protagonist being a writer and living in America. And I just thought I've got to get into it. And so what came out of the book for me, the first thing in terms of like the relationships and the friendships amongst the women, one of the first things that came out for me was friendships are not perfect, because none of us are perfect, right? We are not perfect. And so it's not surprising that friendships aren't perfect. And it's not surprising that, sometimes you have maybe one friend that doesn't get on as well with another friend, or that occasionally there's something about a friend that annoys you. I think that's just normal. Like, it's part of normal life. And I think sometimes I'm talking now, especially as women, I think we sometimes, read a lot into like the odd, disagreement or whatever, and we think, oh, that's it, I'm never having anything to do with them before. But this is normal, because none of us is perfect, right? And so, but we accept our friends as they are, and we still work on and maintain those relationships. That's one of the things that one of the messages I took from the book. The other thing is something about, I think, society very much pits women against each other competitively. So for me, a book that centres female friendships and females standing up for each other was something that really appealed to me. And then the other thing as well, and if you're a Sex and the City fan, especially if you are a woman from the African or Caribbean diaspora, black or brown women, Sex and the City always had this criticism of it was not very diverse. Let's forget the woke, the wokeness that and just like that brought, right? But Sex and the City, the original, was just about these four, what ended up being actually quite middle class and quite wealthy white women, and the friendships. And as much as we still all identified with lots of their experiences, because at the end of the day, people are people, right? But this book, what's nice, obviously, the contrast is these are women from African countries, specifically three who are Nigerian and one who is Guinean. And it's really interesting. I think sometimes, even in literary fiction and in writing and just in society as general, I think sometimes, obviously, we see groups as a monolith, whether that is white men or white women or black men or black women or, Asian people. We sometimes see people as a monolith. And I think particularly with black women, black being such as some people see almost like a political identity, right? And I promise you, I'm not going down that rabbit hole today. But what this book does for me is it brings out the richness and the differences actually between different cultures. So when we're talking about black, there's a lot about what it means to be black if you're in the States, right, in the US, what that looks like, what it means to be black if you're African and you've moved to the US, if you're African, you stayed in Africa. And we don't, and again, Africa is not a monolith, because obviously Africa is not a country, right? So specific to Nigeria in terms of what that looks like, and then the Guinean heritage as well that comes through. So peeling down the layers of blackness and of Africa, not being a monolith, and getting into that in terms of some of the rich cultural heritage of the countries within the continent of Africa was really, really interesting, and I love it. And the thing I would say as well, I think that sort of like monolith is something that I think a lot of writers do, even black writers do. I think there are a lot of even black women that talk about black women as though we're all a monolith, and obviously we're not. And for me, this book squarely kind of like sort of dismantles that, or sort of unpicks it and makes you go a lot deeper, which I absolutely love. The other thing, I really love essay collections. So I do love those different spotlights on different people's lives. And so, you'll see that in some of the other books that I recommend. And so that's probably why I like this, is because it delves into different elements of people's lived experience in a way that other fiction books don't. And so I'd really encourage you to, when you're thinking about books, especially if you run, for example, a book club, and especially if you run like an inclusion book club where you use fiction, for example, to delve into the lived experience of different types of individuals. I would really encourage you to look for essay collections or variety in lived experience. That's one of the things I love about this. And then the other thing about culture, actually, that I found interesting, when we think of Nigeria and we think of things like how business is done, how money works, etc., we often think about corruption and different standards of ethics, right? There's a lot of stereotypes around that. I love that Chimamanda kind of goes into that, you know, through the story, through one of the characters in the book. It's really interesting how it's done. And I would say it kind of gives you a slightly different lens on corruption. In fact, you know, I've got a friend of mine who was dealing with a challenge with somebody from Nigeria. And I sort of said, you know, I was just basically explaining how this book had given me an interesting perspective in terms of how individuals from Nigeria potentially would look at a situation like that in terms of, like, you know, dealing with money and ethics and that kind of thing. So that's just some of the themes that I loved about the book. Now, the other big theme, which if you've read this book, you're thinking, Cheryl, when are you going to get onto Kadiatu, who is one of the characters who doesn't start out as a main character? And here's the thing, I did not realise that this book had this connection to this very famous case, right? And even as I'm reading the book, and there's this Kadiatu character that kind of comes in relatively early on, is, you know, effectively almost like a housekeeper to the protagonist, Chimamanda's character. And this storyline just creeps up. And this is the bit that I sort of said I wasn't expecting, because it really goes in quite deep into her character, her background. The way it's built up is really beautiful. It's a real masterclass in writing, actually, and I can understand why Chimamanda, you know, is a professor and lecturer in writing, because she's an absolute master at it. So this story creeps up on you, and I don't want to give the spoiler just in case you haven't read it, but suffice to say that it's based on the trial of Dominique Strauss-Kahn, which, if you know, you know, he was the head of the IMF at one point. There were lots of rumours and stories, and then this allegation of this sexual assault in a hotel in New York. So it's quite, I mean, it's a heavy topic, right? The book does it incredibly well, like incredibly well. And for me, it just crept, I absolutely didn't know it was coming. So it kind of just came out of nowhere. So it was actually, I mean, not that it was a pleasant surprise, but in terms of like the depth of a book and the arc of a story, it's great writing. And then obviously it sent me down the rabbit hole, because I love rabbit holes, right? It sent me down the rabbit hole of what happened in that case and the backstory to the woman at the centre of the case as well. So that was really interesting. And again, so many conversations and potentially lessons, etc. to have. So if you're doing a book club on this, you know, I'd love to actually be a fly in the wall. I mean, maybe if you are doing a book club on it, invite me, you know, I may just come along. So that's it, really. And I listened to it on audiobook, and Chimamanda narrates it herself. No, in fact, I think there are two voices that narrate, I want to say, maybe two or three voices that narrate it. But yeah, it's incredible. You know, it's an absolutely incredible book. And that's it. That's it. So what was my big takeaway? My big takeaway is really about friendship, and friendship being enduring, and then the different multicultural strands. In fact, and the friendship being enduring, there's a saying that I've heard, I don't know if you've heard this one, but it's like a patois saying, right? Which is sometimes something that I've heard women say, which is that you put man before friend. And it basically means, you know, that when a guy comes along, you basically put them ahead of your female friendships. And obviously that is not the thing to do, right? Because friendships are enduring. The men come and go. As they say in Sex and the City, the men may come and go, the friendships last, right? So my rapid review, what's my rapid review? Rating out of 5. I have to give this one a 5 out of 5. Like, I absolutely have to give it a 5 out of 5. The depth, the layers in terms of talking points. I mean, I've literally just scratched the surface of the talking points. My one-line verdict on it, I would say it's absolutely, if I was writing a review, I'd say it's for black women who love Sex and the City. That is what I would basically say. So who should read it? That's the audience. Who shouldn't read it? Nobody. Everybody can learn from this. Absolutely. Audiobook, physical book, or both. I mean, I'm actually tempted to buy the physical book this year to take away on holiday, because I think it'll be interesting. I think Chimamanda is such a good writer. I think I'd actually quite like the experience of reading the story as well, just to see. It's a different experience, right? Reading to listening. And I am going to do a video on that. So yeah, for me, but I love the narration of the audiobook as well. So that's it. So tell me, what are the friendships in your life that have outlasted the relationships around it? Maybe put down in the comments, have you had female friendships that have outlasted some of the other male friendships that have come and gone? And why do you think that is my final question to you. Don't forget, there are book club questions down below. If you've never done a book club, maybe you want to do a book club on this book, and one of the ways to do that is just find other people that have read the book and maybe invite me along. I'll be happy to join. All right, that's it. That's my take. Let me know yours.